Welcome to Chapter Chumps, a reading podcast where three guys read a book and then talk about it. As ever, I'm your host, Connor. I am joined by my two co-hosts, Connor and Josh. We are your chumps, here to talk some chapters. Today on the podcast, we are discussing the final two chapters and our general thoughts on the book as a whole for Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. This has been a long road. It feels like it's been a
Getting
long
from there
road.
to here, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It should have taken us, it has taken us 10 podcasts. We started this in January, so what should have taken 10 weeks has taken like 18.
Yeah, right. So we've essentially doubled the amount of time we were expected to take on this book if we just stuck to the schedule.
Yes.
And you know what? I'm here to take partial responsibility for that. That is partially my fault. I'm sorry, guys. Sometimes life just gets in the way, you know?
Sure does.
And it kind of feels like that's sort of what happens even with Genly and Estroven. It's only supposed to take them about 700 or so miles to get there, but when all is said and done, there's about 150 miles of zero to backwards progress. You know, that is just because in all they went like 800 something miles, and they did not have to travel that far. And so I kind of feel like our podcast journey in some ways mirrors that trek across the glacier, in that, you know, you go a far enough distance and you're kind of bound to waste some time, right?
And now we can reveal that this was all intentional.
Yeah, finally. And Josh, you understand, right?
This whole journey.
Josh has to be kept in the dark, but he understands, right?
Yeah. I did tell Connor. I didn't tell Josh.
It was for the thematic mirroring of the podcast and the book.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Okay. He doesn't sound impressed, Connor. You said that when I agreed to this, you said he was going to be like blown away, and he doesn't.
Oh, if I know my Josh, he'll come around. He'll come around and be like, "What a brilliant plan you had from the start."
It's like Elon Musk slamming his dick in a car door. Masterful.
This is gonna be the funniest thing ever.
Masterful gambit, sir. That's what they say on Twitter. You guys have been on
Twitter,
right?
Look, I'm wearing.
I've been on Twitter
hats.
in 3 months.
Yeah.
Look, I'm wearing two hats. I'm wearing two different MAGA hats.
Josh, I wish I need to follow in your footsteps. I need to get off of Twitter. It is. I know people make jokes about this, but like obviously it's all true. It is becoming so much worse. Every day I log onto Twitter, and every day I ask myself, what am I still doing here? One of these days, Twitter is going to be the Facebook of my past.
Of MySpace.
Yeah, or whatever. Sure. So
MySpace was never like MySpace just kind of quietly faded away. Facebook and Twitter now,
because everyone moved to Facebook.
Yeah, but both Twitter and Facebook became so deranged and disfigured and disgusting over the
MySpace was just kind of cringe.
Well, it was always cringe. Looking back on it now,
I think with Connor's, it's like MySpace died with dignity, though. It went down.
It did.
Yeah. It's like, was it cringe? Sure, but like there was
pure. It was like a pure. It was like pure part of internet history, you know. Like we can look back fondly on those memories and be like, oh yeah, look at us. It's like, you know, seeing pictures of your parents in the 80s or something, where it's like, oh, what dorks, you know. Like we could look back on that and think that of ourselves. On Facebook and on Twitter, no, we don't want to. We're not going to look back with any fondness, and that sucks.
Yeah, no,
we spent a lot of fucking time on those platforms.
Way more than MySpace at this point, because like cumulatively, you know, it's like, but yeah, there's a charming sincerity to what MySpace was, you know, and then you look at what these social media platforms have become. Yeah, no, it sucks being on Twitter. Let me tell you.
This guy's been all right. I'm following less people over there, so it's far more curated. but
I mean,
it's so much less bullshit now.
I believe it, but I just wonder, like, are Blue Sky's days numbered? Is this just the modern day fate of social media? You migrate from one platform to the other, and eventually it's gonna suck, you know?
That seems to be the trend, yes, but
Yeah, it's hard
why
to
stick
say.
with something that's continuing to suck when you could jump to something that's good for now, and will suck later, but you can then jump to whatever doesn't suck as much next time.
Well, it's
Yeah,
an addiction. It's an addiction. Like it's the it's the dopamine hit of scrolling through the timeline and whatever, being
yeah,
angered, being triggered by all these things. And Blue Sky just doesn't hit that same spot for me yet. And I don't even want that. I don't want that spot to be hit. But
right,
Right.
that's what has me held in the grip of Twitter.
yeah. No, I get
I
that.
just had enough of that. I get enough of it through Reddit, so maybe that's why I was able to duck away from Twitter.
To me,
So
it feels like it's like that line, like the only winning move is not to play. You know, it's like
yep.
I think that what I really need to do is just stop. You know, but I don't know when that's gonna happen. It's not anytime soon. But it's like it's one of those like it's stupid because like logically,
Mhm.
rationally, my brain can tell me stop doing it, and yet I'm unable to like take the good advice, and I'm like, no, I'm just gonna like keep slowly like jabbing myself with a rusty fucking dagger mentally over and over again for no reason. For no reason, I get
I
nothing
mean,
out
that's
of
how
it.
I feel just reading the news at all.
Yeah,
But I mean, it's more of a Twitter was a concentrated fire hose of that, so I could at least deaden the blow by getting off of Twitter.
yeah,
Um, and like I said, Reddit is still a fire hose of shit, but it's less concentrated, and there's corners of it I can still go to without having to worry about everything. And then if I really want to tune everything out, there's a couple Discord channels that I hop into and participate in a little bit. So
well, there you go. And you know, I hope that somewhere out there, I like to think that
there's still some
somewhere
good
out
internet out
there
there.
there's someone listening to us and thinking, you know what, this is my one little corner of online serenity. You know, this is what I look forward to. This is what gets me through the week.
I
Just
hope you
three
can find
guys.
something better than us for your serenity.
No, 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 no. This is the apex right here. Just there's no bullshit. There's no veneer.
Can you?
Just
I'm
three
sorry.
guys just talking about
Just
a
three
book.
chumps.
Can you hear Nova chewing on her toy at my feet?
I cannot know.
Okay, I can hear it through my headphones. I was just worried.
No. No, but see, that's what I'm talking about. On other podcasts, they wouldn't interrupt and say, "Can you hear my dog?" But you know what? On this
Actually,
one,
yes they do.
there's no
I've
fucking
listened to
bullshit.
podcasts that do
There
that.
there is no fucking bullshit. This is just three fucking guys. We're not professionals. But you know what? You come to us every week to hear three fucking chumps talk about a book. And guess what? That's what you're going to get today. The conclusion of The Left Hand of Darkness, boys.
Gotta rate it.
Amen.
Well, yeah, get ready for that. Certainly. As we're talking about this, please mentally prepare yourself for the rating. It's coming.
Oh, guys, I do have a hard out at 8, so 20 minutes.
Fuck
Yeah.
off.
Yeah, Connor,
Just
I
joking.
almost made that joke. I
All right.
almost was gonna do that, but you know, I had a little more decorum than that. It's the last episode of Left Hand of Darkness. Come on, whatever. Um, yeah. So we read the last two chapters. We've read the ending of this book. We are done with the Left Hand of Darkness. We're gonna have our chapter discussion, and then we're gonna be discussing our thoughts on the book as a whole. Um, just like a quick shoot from the hip here. How did you feel finishing this book? Not even like what did you think about what happened? We're obviously going to get into the nitty gritty of it all. What I'm wondering is like what was your feeling? Did you feel like you were left with anything, or that this book had an impact on you as you read those last two
I
chapters?
Well, here's the problem. I first read these chapters over a week ago at this point because we had to reschedule again, and which has just been the whole theme of this book or this podcast reading the book, unfortunately.
Yes, it has
Um,
been.
but when I did sit down to read it, I intended to read one chapter on Monday, the second chapter on Tuesday, and ended up reading both chapters on Monday because I got to the end of the first chapter and was like, well, fuck, I gotta read what's next. Without getting into the specifics of the story, I feel like the actual ending, like the ending
Mm-hmm.
of the last chapter, was a little underwhelming. It kind of felt loose, and not loose isn't the right word, but like unsatisfying. But I think that's the point. The point, based on what happened, is that like, yeah, it's not supposed to feel whole and complete anymore. And I don't know, I definitely enjoyed it, and this book has left me with a lot of self reflection to think about. And I mean, we've talked about it throughout this podcast of just how it analyzes uh, politics and gender and how people see one another, just in general. Um, it does leave you with a lot to think about, and I'm glad we've been able to discuss it throughout this podcast. Um, but yeah, we can get to more specifics about the story in a moment.
Totally. Connor, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I mean Josh is right. I just personally, my personal preference, I'm not unsatisfied by the ending, but I think Josh is right in that it's an intentionally it's staged like this intentionally, and I think these final two chapters are really great, and they really uh, they really bring it all together for me, because it's just it's a very human story about these aliens, and it's powerful to me, at the end. It does all come down to the connection between Genly and Esterman, and the impact that uh, they had on each other. Yeah, it's a weird feeling that it leaves you with. It is.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, and I think this is exactly what was intended, but it leaves you like with the warmth and with the coldness, which I think
Yeah.
is the intended effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. And if it is intended, pretty remarkable, because it feels like the whole left hand, right hand kind of dichotomy of the whole book. But yeah, I definitely had some mixed feelings. And kind of like you're saying, Connor, like literally it felt like my feelings were mixed. Not even like, oh, parts of it were good and parts of it were bad, but the book kind of left me feeling a little bit scrambled. Like I finished the book and it felt like I kind of was in this haze a little bit, not to be dramatic, but there definitely is like a feeling, a moment of like finishing a book that's oftentimes different than like the end of a movie or the end of a video game or whatever, because in my estimation, it's because of like the time requirement and oftentimes like the length of time that you engage with the story over time. Um, and so like to finish it, uh, I, it's sort of leaves it. And you know what it feels like to me? I guess I don't want to like have just like general whatever, it's like I can't speak for anyone else, but it's sort of like that feeling of walking up or down a staircase and you think there's going to be one more step, because like you get used to the stairs and we get used to reading the two chapters every week of the same story, and then eventually after enough time you reach the ending at whatever pace you're going, and it just kind of feels like there's supposed to be that one more step because you've acclimated yourself to the schedule, or the routine of reading the story, and then it's over suddenly. And this was
Yep.
definitely a book that made me feel like, wow, suddenly it's over, because it does feel like it sort of just ends and your foot misses that last step. And I was like, that's the ending, huh? um, so yeah, let's get into the specifics. Let's talk about it. Chapter 19 is Homecoming, obviously a Green Day reference. In many people's estimations, one of the best songs off American Idiot. I mean, I don't know how you would argue otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't. It was incredible to hear it live.
Twice.
2 times.
Twice. Imagine that.
Nice.
Yeah. But in all seriousness here, even though obviously the first thing I did think about was Green Day when I read Homecoming. Yeah, they're finally off the glacier. Estrevin and Genly, they make it off the glacier. They have to find like the nearest outpost of civilization. They go to this very isolated town, and hey, the culture of Carhide is to welcome strangers with hospitality and open arms. So Genly and Estrevin are they get to recuperate there for like a week or so, and then it's like they got to move on. There's sort of this axe looming over them of like, oh well, Estrevin's back in the country where he was exiled, and so like anyone giving them aid is potentially if it's found out who Estrevin is, then like everything falls apart. So they're, even though they're back in civilization, they're not back in safety. And so they move on and they go to they go to the Sinoth Valley, and they go to the town. I think the town itself is called like Sassanoth or something, but that's where the Sinoth Valley dispute was happening. And they have to go there because they have a radio tower, and Genly can send his message to the starship, and so they're able to do that. And meanwhile, Genly and Estrevin are being like sheltered by one of the farmers that Estrevin relocated during the whole Sinoth Valley dispute. And so Estrevin's kind of taking this risk, this gamble here, and he's like, hey, you know who I am and you know the dangers of harboring me, but I did you this humongous solid. So it's like, we can cash that in, right? And it's not transaction. The book is very clear that it's not transactional like that. It's more of like a spiritual sort of exchange. And so, Estrevin is like, my life is in your hands and vice versa, right? So seems like that's all good. Genly, after he goes to the town and he sends out his radio message, he's coming back to the farm, and Estrevin's already leaving, and he's like, oh, fuck, wouldn't you know it, the guy ratted us out to Tybe, so now the border people are here, and this sucks, so we have to cross the border into Orgeron, so Tybe's men won't have any power to arrest us. Okay, totally. So they get to the border. The border patrol's already there, so they have to camp out until dark. And then Estrevin is like, now's the time. We got to cross. And Genly's like, you know what? On second thought. And then Estrevin's just gone.
Yep. You gonna say it?
And Estrevin is shot fucking dead. Right there, man. And Genly is allowed a moment to mourn, and he's arrested, and well, our chapter ends there. This was a tough one, wasn't it, lads?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of get the feeling leading up to this chapter that something happens to Estrevin at the end, because in the parts of the book where it seems to be referring to the events in the past tense, as in like Genly is recounting them later on, he always speaks of Estrevin as someone who was or wasn't around for some reason, or that they were somehow separated. And yeah, so it still was kind of shocking watching Estrevin uh, just shoot off directly into the gunfire, but it is what happened.
Yeah. And just going off what you're saying there, Josh, I know we had to reschedule. It's been, off and on but we had talked at least last episode saying, kind of think Estrevin is going to die at the end of this book.
Yeah.
It felt like even then it was sort of telegraphing, because Genly kept saying, like, what are you going to do when we get back to Carhide? And Estrevin like, don't worry about it. You just got to send your message and it'll be all good. And I'm like, that is the fucking words of a dead man,
Yep. Death flag.
Yeah. And even in this chapter, when Genly tells him, like, my condition for bringing the ship down is to clear your name. And then
yes,
Estrevin like, oh, yeah, that's a nice thought. Like, it doesn't.
Just make sure the signal gets through, Mal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But to go back to kind of your point to go back to your point of feeling like you're walking up a flight of stairs and there's a missing step or whatever you're expecting, that literally happens kind of to them in the beginning of the chapter when they're walking the totally white sheet of ice, and they then they come to the crevasse that trips them up, and it's a whole big ordeal. I just wanted to point that out before we moved on, because that's literally what happens to them.
I forgot that's how the chapter opened, but you're right.
Yeah.
They pull up Estrevin and he's like, oh, everything's blue. It's all blue.
Yeah.
He's just like he saw his life flash.
Dazed.
He died essentially there.
Yeah. It was a scare, and a scare generally. This is kind of foreshadowing to his reaction to the death, like a little bit, just because it wasn't really directly about losing Estrevin. That was part of it. But after that happens, Genly is like, he's afraid to take a step. Even it's very hard to break out of that just totally white landscape, because the next step they could be death, because they have no perspective. So yeah, that was a cool way to start it. And then we get to finally civilization a little bit, and they see people again for the first time in forever, and I like how Genly says, like, oh yeah, I forgot that there are people that could look different than Estrevin. Like, he's been away for so long that, like, he just kind of forgot about the concept of, oh yeah, other people. And so that's they're shell shocked. Like, they are very shell shocked here, and I mean, Genly remains shell shocked through the end of the book, really.
Yeah. He does seem very detached throughout the rest of the story.
Yeah. I mean, especially after Estrevin death. But yeah, I don't know. I think the whole thing with them finding lodging with this person who they I guess they thought they could trust, and then being betrayed is I don't know. I think you do kind of think that Estrevin thought that was inevitable. I think I think he kind of knew that whoever he turned to, it wasn't going to go well for him. He never expected to get out of this alive. And you guys called that, at least an episode or two ago. And it's brutal.
It is. The whole thing about Estrevin, maybe already realizing he's not going to make it, made me think a little bit too. I think this was the previous episode. I mentioned that my mom, when I explained the story to her, she's like, "Oh, it's kind of like a Christ allegory."
Yeah.
This chapter sort of made me think about that in a less straightforward way, but it's the moment where Estraven is leaving and tells Genly what happened. And Genly's immediate reaction is like, oh, that fucking rat bastard, he betrayed us. And Estraven's like, no, it was my fault. I shouldn't have put that on him.
Yeah.
And immediately I was like, uh, that's like such, like otherworldly kind of forgiveness and benevolence to, this person condemned him to death effectively, but Estraven has like that very zoomed out perspective where he's like, well, did he, or was it my fault for even showing up there, like knowing the circumstances? And so I'm not even trying to like draw the parallel, like, oh, so that means Estraven's Jesus, but like it was on my mind, and I kind of feel like if indeed there is any kind of like Messiah or Christ allegory in the story, when I was explaining the story to my mom, she was like, "Oh, well, it must be Genly, right? Because he is kind of this outworlder uh coming from this other place and offering like a different path and like essentially like the keys to the kingdom." And I think that's all there, but like a big thing that these last two chapters really hammer home is that Estraven and Genly, in some ways, are kind of the same person. And Estraven portraying these traits sort of made me consider like Estraven's almost like the other half of if you were going to draw that parallel, like to have that, not only to be the one who dies, but like to have like the foresight and the acceptance and the forgiveness like within those circumstances is is I don't know, reminiscent of that in some ways, of the death of Christ, which is like a bold big claim, but those things
The death
do
of Saint
have
Jimmy.
have parallels exactly in literature. So I'm gonna hop off because I'm kind of speaking for my mom right now. This isn't even
Welcome
my
to Bible Boys.
this is but like my mom really did kind of plant that seed and make me think like, is there something there? And I was thinking about
Well,
that reading these last two chapters, and
yeah,
I feel like it still is like reminiscent of that. That's all.
yeah. No, I think you're right about that. And I can't help but think that there was some intention there. But the whole point of the story even is like you're like, okay, yeah, it's expected to be Genly because he's the off-worlder alien coming to bring society to a new level, whatever. But I think in the end, it's like both Genly and Estraven are aliens, and they're in different ways, and so I think it's applicable to either or both of them. So no, I think that's still a totally worthwhile comparison to make.
Totally. Um, obviously we're gonna have a lot to talk about here, and already it's cool that we're kind of riffing on some big ideas here in the ending. Um, Josh, do you have any notes you want to mention or anything specific you want to go off of as we kind of continue through our discussion here?
Um, no, that's probably my biggest failing on this book is I didn't really take notes throughout it.
Oh,
Nothing significant, unfortunately. I did honestly expect us to record last week, so I thought I was
you
in a
were
good
gonna have it
spot.
fresh in your mind. I know. I'm sorry.
Yep. But yeah, no, I did like that Estraven's prediction about what was going to happen afterwards came true. Probably talk about that more in the second chapter, but it did. He does pretty much lay it out in this chapter. Um, and I think all the spaceship stuff is in the next chapter as well. So yeah, most of what I remember is the ice, and that like Connor was talking about earlier with the Estraven falling into the crevasse, and how I've always read or heard that Arctic exploration deals with like crevasses and stuff like that, and like that's the scary bit.
Yeah,
So I'm surprised it took until the end of the book for that to come up. Um, I I guess that's just my perception of Arctic exploration is that crevasses are more of a threat than this book made it out to be specifically. It's kind of like this book's quicksand. If you grow up thinking it's a huge threat, and then it turns out it's barely a thing in the real world. But then they do exist, and they are dangerous. I'm not trying to discount them, but I was surprised it came. They spent half the book crossing a fucking glacier, and crevasses didn't come up until the second to last chapter.
Mm.
But yeah, when they got back to civilization, I tried to keep all the names straight, but it was a lot. And I was just kind of like, all right, they're in the big town with the radio tower, and they're meeting Estroven's friend, and uh, like you could tell pretty much right away he was going to rat them out. It was just a matter of time, but I guess good thing he got the signal off 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's the ending really did, even though it was kind of telegraphed, it did come as a shock that Estroven is dead, and we see Genly caring for him in his final moments, and it was pretty upsetting.
It was. Before we really get to Estroven's death, because I do have more I want to say about it, I want to go back to some of what you're talking about there too, Josh, which is like the Arctic exploration and then the return to society. I have a couple notes I want to get through here. So on page 290, Genly's writing about like the end of their experience on the Gorbin ice sheet. He's saying, I cannot describe these last days of our journey very well, blah, 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 blah.
Oh, right, the hunger.
Yes, the hunger. But then he goes on to say, I had, if anything, a vague feeling all the time of liberation, of having got beyond something, of joy. And just shortly later on, page 297, this is when they get to that first, isolated town or whatever, their first taste back at civilization. Or actually, as I'm looking at it, it says they're in Sasanoth, which is where the radio tower is. Anyways, Genly then writes, there was no more joy in us. Just prior to ice, says, the saga was over. It belonged to the ice. We were very tired. We were going the wrong direction. There was no more joy in us. He's talking about like their journey like through civilization from that tiny little town to Sasanoth. You would think that it would be easier, and you would think that it would be a welcome change, and yet Genly describes his time on the ice as liberating and filled with joy. And then Genly goes on just after that to describe his journey from that town to Sasanoth as without joy. And I thought it was very telling that Le Guin has Genly use specifically that word, because it feels like there's a direct comparison with joy and without joy. And so, like, a little bit larger than that, I sort of felt like there's this idea of like true freedom versus allowed or allotted freedom through society. And like even with the hardship and the terrible physical toll and demand and pain and stuff, even with everything that happened on the ice sheet, is the moment that Genly feels like truly joyous. And he writes even in the previous chapters, that's the moment that to this day in the present of the book, he returns to those moments when he needs to sleep. Like he feels joy and he feels peace. And yet it's like back in society, he's empty. And so I don't know. I guess it's kind of like a general broad sort of claim here, but I feel like there's this idea of essentially true freedom. And then I think Le Guin's sort of making a commentary on whatever freedoms that are given to you through whatever government you live under, you know, just by the very virtue of it being allotted to you or drip fed to you, or however you experience freedom within a society, by the very nature of living within a society, you must have less freedom than if you were outside of that society, because there are rules and laws and so on and so forth that you must abide by within those structures. And obviously there's a wealth of things that are afforded to you living within those structures. But again, I think the big point here is like true freedom versus uh, allowed freedom. And that was just a small part of this chapter, but I thought it was very telling that Genly feels that joy on the ice, and he loses it when he returns to the society of Karhide.
So when I was reading that bit, I don't think I put together the freedom bit angle on it at all. Um, I saw it more as survival. And when they're on the ice, they only have each other, so they take joy in the fact that they're together, they're surviving. But once they've reached Karhide, once they're back amongst civilization or whatever passes civilization in that part of Karhide, um, they're kind of past they're over the hurdle. So it's like their spirits have given out because they've reached their goal. They have made it, and now they're just exhausted. And then they find out they have to do a little bit more, but it's not the same. It's different. It the I don't know, the freedom angle that you brought up is interesting. I think I personally disagree with some of what you brought up, but I don't know. It's a lot to think about when I've only had about 4.5 hours of sleep.
No, you're good. I think I think you're right too, Josh. But as far as the freedom goes, like, I mean, yeah, if you think about it, like, generally he's kind of grown up in this ecumenical system and is following their directive. Then he down in Karhide, he is under a mad king being ruled by the whims of himself and his cronies. And then in Oregon there's a whole other slew of bureaucratic nightmares that run his life. And so I think there's definitely an element of feeling true freedom out on the ice with Estraven, and that he's never felt before. A different part of like the joy aspect is, Josh nailed it when he said like it's survival. Like that makes life very, very simple for the two of them. Like they're forced to drop all of the petty worries about everything else to focus on one thing.
I
And
was
that
gonna say
and that
it's kind of like,
brings joy.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, what I was trying to get at was that it's kind of like coming down from an adrenaline high.
That too, yeah. Absolutely.
So
When they're all done, they have no energy to feel joy. It's just they're wiped of all of it.
or to put it in more of a context of the book, it's like the Doth
Yeah.
strength, and what's it? They use the super strength to get through the glacier, and Doth, that's what it was. And now that they're back in society, they're in the rest period, but they're forcing themselves beyond it, and that's where the joy leaves them.
Mm-hmm.
Is they're in that super need to rest. We're probably going to sleep for a very long time if once we are able to rest, but they can't because they need to get the signal out, then they're being chased, and then Estraven takes the longest nap.
Yeah, true enough. Yeah, I can definitely see that, and I appreciate the other perspectives on that, because I think that they're I guess like I agree and I get what you're saying. I do feel like um I don't know. I guess I do still sort of feel like there's a little bit of this idea of like Genly sort of coming to feel like he's sort of at the mercy of these larger systems, and that I think like Estraven's death uh is like a big sort of wake up call for him, in terms of like the game he's playing in some ways. But um I don't know. Maybe we'll come back to that because I think that like sort of the depression that he goes through in the next chapter we're going to discuss, like that's also something that makes me think about this whole like you would think he's happy coming back to society but he isn't sort of deal. And a lot of that's wrapped up in what happens to Estraven too, which we still need to talk about. So
Yeah.
um okay, I took a bunch of notes, but even I don't remember all. So I'm just gonna go through and read some of the ones that I feel like are relevant, and then we can kind of get to the whole Estraven death deal, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Um, I liked the whole Estraven has like this Shifgrathor conversation with the members of this outpost where they're trying to kind of figure out what the fuck are you guys doing here and why did you cross the glacier. And Estraven says something to the effect of one person may be outlawed in Karhide, another in Orgeron. Um, not only is it cool to see them have that exchange, but this was a line that also made me appreciate the yin yang symmetry of Genly and Estraven,
Yep.
because I didn't really consider uh Genly to be outlawed in Orgeron in a way. Like it's very clear that Estraven is in exile in Karhide. That formally happens. There's a whole broadcast about it. But when Genly is discarded and thrown to the Pilfin work farm or whatever, I never really thought about that as like, oh well, so Genly is himself like an outlaw in Orgeron, like but of course that's the whole reason why they can't just fucking leave Orgeron the normal way. Like I get that on the face of it. Like I guess what I mean is like I understand the consequences and I understood the whole time why they have to cross the ice sheet and why they can't be seen in Orgeron because Genly would just be recaptured. But this line made me draw the parallel between Genly and Estraven even further, where it's like they mirror one another in their exile of these like two neighboring uh you know lands, that have this. And then like of course the sign off valley dispute, it's like you imagine the map or something, right? It's like, and you have these two opposing lands and their power struggles, and Estraven is of one and Genly becomes like of the other, and then they're exiled from crisscross. And then like in the center of that there's that disputed sign off valley land that Estraven has his connection. That's what he discusses in like the fucking second chapter, or the first chapter. It's the very first chapter that Estraven mentions it, and um, the fact that that's like where this story culminates and where Estraven himself meets his end feels like very poetic and very meaningful. But again, like yeah, the whole Estraven and Genly in this chapter, they literally mention the yin yang symbol. This is referenced. I
Yep.
have a note on that too, which is like very telling, and that's exactly what Estraven and Genly are. Like, it's the darkness within the light and the light within the darkness, and those two things coming together are not opposed. They're two halves of the same whole, and like
Yes.
all of this stuff together made me consider more and more that like that's exactly, I think, Estraven and Genly's deal. I think that's why they don't fuck. I think that's why they don't have sex, because in some ways it's like so much more beyond like having desire for one another. It's like Estrevin and Genly are themselves half of a person and only become whole upon meeting each other. And so like a lot of these conversations, this one included that I referenced about being outlawed in Ordrin and outlawed in Karhide, this was like all part of like the mounting sort of details as I read that made me think more and more about like the nature of their relationship, and not their relationship in terms of like desire for one another, but like as like literary characters and what like their meeting and their dynamic with one another like means. And I feel like ultimately like they come to represent the yin yang of it all, like symbolically, you know.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. Guys, keep talking.
Yeah.
I gotta go put the bird to bed. Just give me 1 second.
Okay. That means I don't know if that bird's waking up. Put the bird to bed.
Okay.
That sounds sounds heavy with meaning, doesn't it?
Yeah. I honestly don't know if he's like pet sitting for a bird right now or not.
No, Josh, I can tell you that Connor does indeed live with a bird.
First I'm hearing of it.
Isn't that something? I know.
I'm also flabbergasted by the fact that he needs to put the bird to bed.
Well, you know, it's like they have a little. You have to tuck it in, and it's probably gonna read a little bedtime story, and you know, how else would you put a bird to bed? I don't know.
I've heard that birds are kind of stupid, and you just put like a hood on their heads and they just go to sleep.
Yeah, no.
So he's probably just doing that.
He is. He's gonna put like a blanket or something over the bird cage, I think. Yeah. But I don't know. What does that mean? To be enshrouded in darkness but surrounded by lights really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
There you go.
Yes, it does.
I know. The other thing I wanted to talk about here, page 300, and maybe it's dumb of me to be referencing page numbers because I feel like you guys are like, okay. But on page 300, Genly is considering this is on like that big top paragraph about in the middle of the page. It says, and I wondered, not for the first time, what patriotism is, what the love of country truly consists of, how that yearning loyalty that had shaken my friend's voice arises, and how so real a love can become, too often, so foolish and vile a bigotry. Where does it go wrong?
One of the theses of the book, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like this section here really shows that Estrevin does love Karhide, like the people and the land, you know, and that like and Estrevin obviously has no problems denying or going against the king, you know. And so there's this clear distinction between like the government of a nation and like the soul of a nation in a way. And Estrevin very clearly serves like that sort of yeah, like more pure idea of like the love of the country versus like blind you know, following of whoever is in the carousel of leadership over you know, an allotted piece of land. Those two things are very different, and I guess I like that the book sort of comes back to this too, because that is again kind of how the book opens. That whole conversation with Genly and Estrevin in Estrevin's home. That was one of like the first major topics of discussion is like that Estrevin talks about like the nature of patriotism and so like I'm glad that the book returned to it here. I don't know if I have so much more to add. I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts are on it too, obviously. But like, just that Le Guin has Genly consider this again, and Genly sort of realizes like, yeah, Estraven really loves Carhide in a way that I think is even like different and alien for how Genly feels about any singular planet he's lived on, or any part of the Ecumen. It's like I don't think I don't really get the impression that Genly even has this fondness for Terra or Earth, because I think that their understanding and their dynamics between like a people and a place is so much different than what it's like to be on a singular planet and to have that like bond
Yeah.
with a nation. Any thoughts you want to share on I don't know, the nature of patriotism and like what Genly and Estraven
Well,
are kind of ruminating on here?
I feel like we kind of touched on it in previous podcasts. I mean, when it first got brought up, the nature of patriotism, I've always had a bit of trying to find the line between patriotism and nationalism,
Yes.
and it's a very thin line in some areas, but I think this line is basically asking that question, like where does patriotism how does patriotism become nationalism, and that that fervor that drives people to atrocities. And it's just I don't know if this book I do know that the book doesn't quite answer that, but it does make you think about it, so that you're asking the question and you're aware of it, and the fact that you're aware of it means you can hopefully avoid it, but or avoid it being like sliding from patriotism to nationalism. But it's I don't know, it's a difficult question even today, and especially today, and it's just one of those questions where you just kind of have to look at a given situation and be like, yes, that's patriotism, and no, that's too far, and just kind of put the dots together, and maybe you'll find a solid definition at some point, but other times it'll be like it's just a cloud of points, and it's fuzzy, and it's going to be
Yeah.
fuzzy forever.
Yeah. No,
So
I think you're right. It doesn't offer us a definitive solution. I think we do get maybe a potential answer in the next chapter. When Genly is talking about Estervin to King Argivan. But yeah, it's a very fine line to I mean just something you I guess you should be mindful of, I guess, and should keep an eye on what these sentiments are, and how they influence the unfolding of a country. Yeah, I mean that's really all there is. It's I mean, really, the solution to it is to join the Ecumen, and to to denounce caring about all this silly worldly stuff, and join a universal league of humans and whatever aliens. But yeah, I think it's a good thing that it makes you really really dig into it, and think, even if you can't uh, reach a fine point on it.
Yeah. And as we're talking about it, I don't know if I'm right on this or not, but I think when we initially brought it up, and maybe this was in the first episode, I posited something like, well, I think kind of the difference between patriotism and nationalism is when your government convinces you to kill other people um, for reasons that have nothing to do with like your personal relationship with one another. Um, and I'm not saying that that's the answer, but I do think I shared a sentiment, essentially on that point, and it's interesting that that's how Estraven meets his end. The people who end up killing him are just doing it under orders from Tybe. So it's like it's Tybe and Estraven, if anything, between two people who like have this conflict, and yet like the people who pull the trigger, the people who ultimately are the ones who kill Estraven, they do it through this means of political power, and I would argue effectively through nationalism, like the
Mm-hmm.
nationalistic power of Karhide that you can give an order to someone you don't know to kill someone else that they don't know. Like in my mind, it's not as cut and dry as that, but like to give an example of what nationalism is, that is certainly under the umbrella of it. um
Yeah.
and so I guess I would just sort of like end this by arguing that I think that Estraven meets his end like through and because of nationalism, because if that nationalistic power and pride was not present in Karhide, then why would those men have pulled the trigger, you know
Yeah, and just jumping off of that, like not going too deeply into the next chapter,
it's all right.
but really it makes me feel like yeah, like nationalism, it can be thought of like caring more for your country and your countrymen, uh putting them over, humanity as a whole, I think is where that line can be crossed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that definitely rings true, I would say. I agree.
It,
um
this conversation has also reminded me a bit of the end of season 5 of Red versus Blue, the end of the Blood Gulch Chronicles, where one of the characters' church basically has this monologue that boils down to you shouldn't hate someone because someone told you to. You should hate them because you know the person,
yeah.
and because you know that they're an idiot or a know-it-all or just a pain in the ass, and not just again because someone told you to. It's a funny little thesis that I don't know. It's just this conversation was reminding me of it. I wanted to bring it up.
Well, I do definitely think there's truth to that. You gotta fucking find your own answers, figure out who you hate. It's the same shit as this is what I'm talking about being on Twitter. You go on Twitter,
Yeah,
you look at a thread, everyone's just like at Grok. Is this true? Is this what I fucking think? This is and
yeah,
it's like that's the biggest thing about loving Dune. Talking about Dune and how this book kind of relates to it. It's like, Dune is all about thinking for your Dune is simultaneously about the ways in which people are like swept up in like the actions of others, and yet like Herbert's always kind of showcasing, like, even with something like the jihad, it's like that is like a mass inaction of people's minds and consciences and bodies, like willed to do the destruction of a one singular person, and it's like that's fucked up, and Herbert
hmm
is always like, think for yourself, you know, figure it the fuck out. Don't give your fucking willpower over to a thinking machine. You need to fucking think. And I think that Le Guin is in her own way, essentially, delivering a very similar kind of message in a very different way. And that's not the heart of what her book is, but yeah, it's definitely here, and it's definitely present in this conversation between patriotism and nationalism.
Yeah.
yes.
All right, let's talk about Estraven's death. We got to talk about his death, and then we got to get to this next chapter. Um, yeah, so Estraven meets his end in the Synoth Valley. We already kind of talked about that. Um, and I don't know. I guess I'll just share how I feel about it first, and then I'd love for you guys to jump in. But like, we were kind of talking about how this is telegraphed, and Josh and I were picking up on this as we're reading, and it's like, yeah, it does kind of seem like it's gonna lead to this, and yet, Le Guin still is able to pull the rug out from under you. Like when it actually happens, it's kind of like watching a car crash or something. It's like
Yeah.
I knew it was unfolding, and yet I still was like, I almost couldn't believe it, and I still like held out hope that it wasn't going to go that way. And I think that's part of what makes his death like feel tragic, and that like I think that's part of like that mastery as an author. Like you might think as a reader sometimes that it's like the surprise that gets you, but I think that Le Guin pulls a much more like crafty and expertly sort of conceived trick here, which is like both telegraphing and surprising you. And that's what leads to it feeling tragic and feeling inevitable, because like you're given these clues as you read up to this point that like, yeah, Estraven's gonna die, and yet like when the moment finally comes, it sort of feels like, what if Estraven said something a second earlier? Or what if he put his hand out on his shoulder? Or
you mean gently?
I did mean to say gently. Yeah, right. It's
okay.
Like, could there have been anything done to stop it? When I was reading this part of the book, like Genly has this like crystallizing moment just mere moments prior, where he's like, even if Estraven makes it to the other side of the border, he's going to be immediately rounded up by the Urgoda police and left to rot into a jail, or worse, he'll be thrown into the fucking farm, or like whatever, even in the best case scenario, whatever fate is left to Estraven, it is horrible. And so Genly kind of lets out this feeble sort of gasp, this last ditch effort, and Estraven's already accounted for everything. Like we've sort of touched it. You get the impression Estraven knows. He's known the entire time. He's known since before they set out on the glacier, where this journey was ending, and Estraven's only just now realizing it. And
I think you mean Genly again.
I do, yeah. I do. I do mean Genly. God damn it. Sorry. I do mean Genly's only just now realizing like what is, what the stakes really are here. And the last thing I want to mention is I just felt like this was kind of wrapped up. Connor had mentioned that Genly sort of has, like, if you look at him from a certain perspective, he kind of has this selfish sort of nature to him, in wanting to be the one to bring Gethin into the Ecumen. And we talked about how, like, he doesn't have like this enlightened sort of perspective. Like he wants it to be him, And then we see like a later example of this in the tent, where Genly, he realizes just moments before he admits that he has some kind of desire for Estraven. He's like, for the first time, I saw him as a man who is a woman, and a woman who is you know what I mean? Like, Genly keeps having these revelations too late and only moments before the pivotal turn. And I think that is tied up into a kind of selfishness. It's not a deliberate selfishness, and it's not even like a bad selfishness. It's a human selfishness. It's a selfishness that you can understand and forgive, and wrap your head around. But it happens again here. Genly realizes just half a second before the event occurs, he's like, oh, I didn't even think about what was going to happen to Estraven, and now it doesn't matter, because whether he succeeds or fails, his fate is not good. And of course, he ultimately dies here. And so I felt like there's a lot that sort of like orbits this moment, and and it kind of occurs in a flash. I feel like Le Guin, she's able to pack a lot of like meaning and gravitas into this very small. This takes place over the course of like a page and a half, you know. So I was very impressed by like the way she crafted that moment and the way she wrote everything and how things like, you know, ultimately lead to this. So yeah, Estroven's dead. I was sad, man.
Yeah, me too. I think this definitely informs, the state Genly's in the next chapter, where and that's one of the things, being singularly focused on one thing really is a bit of his to a bit of his detriment. And yeah, there's implications he doesn't contend with before it's too late. And really, just in retrospect, does he realize how meaningful this relationship has been?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
What about by the time Genly gets to Estroven, he's effectively dead, but like he's just barely holding on to that sliver of life. And Genly's calling out to him, and the only response that Genly gets is Estroven giving one last like mind speech, and he calls out his brother's name, Eric.
Sad. Yeah, it goes back to how Estrin was just hearing his brother's voice when mind speaking with Genly.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's like it's one of those ideas I can't put into words at the moment, but it's like, was he thinking that he was hearing his brother reach out to him in his final moments? Was he reaching out to his brother in his final moments and wasn't aware Genly was there? Um, it leaves a lot of open questions that Genly has to wrestle with now, because he's the only one who heard that mind speech.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's yeah.
I was gonna say it actually reminds me of Star Trek, one of the more recent movies, where it's Into Darkness, where Captain Pike dies and Spock's right there, so he mind melds with Pike as he's dying just to experience that. And it's like, that is some of the most like disturbing level of thoughts that you could think to you could think about, but they just kind of brush it off over the course of the movie. It's not really a plot point. It's just like a thing Spock did. And I don't know, that whole concept has always kind of haunted me since I saw that movie.
Yeah.
And this Estroven reaching out the mind speech is like, yeah, they were practically in mental contact when Estroven died, and that had to have been quite devastating.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it definitely triggers that empathic part of me, wherever that may reside.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
all those open-ended questions, like you're saying, Josh, it's like I I think that's the idea. It's like you're left with all that uncertainty. You know, you wrestle with it just as much as Genly. Sorry, Connor, were you gonna say something?
Oh no, I'm just I think it's again in retrospect it's the two of them seeing each other for who they are beyond gender, beyond Shifgrathor, beyond the planet of origin. I think there is obviously a reason why he hears Eric's voice when when Mind's speaking with Genly, and it's maybe that's the only other time he's felt that with somebody. So uh, those are that's one thing that I considered.
Totally. do we want to mention anything else on this chapter before we get to the final chapter of the book? No, we're good.
Not that I can
I'm
think
all
of at this
good.
point.
Okay. Okay.
But thank you for asking.
Of course. I'll always ask. If I steamroll over you, just tell me. Just get up like a flat and wily coyote and say, "Hey, I had one more thing to say." So, all right, chapter 20, A Fool's Errand. Um this is obviously a big chapter. Connor already mentioned Genly ends up talking to the King of Karhide. They have to like set up everything for the starship to land for like the envoy ship from the starship to land. Um and Yeah, it's kind of crazy that like we actually get to see other humans and stuff. Um they're named characters. We get information on like where they're stationed and what their
Yeah.
responsibilities are in like like working with different regions on Gethin. Like more detail than I thought we were going to get. I kind of thought it was just going to be like we're here now and then it ends,
Yeah,
but
it did feel more like an epilogue
yeah.
than a final chapter, which is a weird sentence to say, considering that's what epilogue is in the first place. Um, but it after Genly's conversation with the king, I feel like that is where the story ends and the epilogue begins.
Yeah. No, I get that. And it definitely does have that like feeling or that energy to it. Yeah, there's a lot of things that wrap up which we can talk about, but I guess like the broad brushstrokes, it's like right, the discussion with the king, the landing of the starship in the Ecumen, and then after a certain amount of time, things are kind of like settled and transitioning, and the Ecumen has like a real presence and power on Gethin. And Genly's like, I need a fucking vacation. I need some time
Yep.
off. And I'm wondering, like, where's he going? Where's he going to? Well, he goes to the kingdom of Esther, the land in which Estraven was born and was himself in exile from, right? Like, I think Estraven also
Yep.
mentions that's like part of his backstory. Like, he's also kind of kicked out of there.
Yeah, I don't know if that was ever truly expanded on, but I mean, we talked briefly about, or I talked briefly a while ago about how his name Estraven basically breaks down to man of Estra.
Mhm.
So this kind of proved that a little bit, but I also don't. I think that may have just been called out in the story that I connected those dots in. I think it's the one where the Gathenian version of Romeo and Juliet.
Right. Yeah, no, they have talked about that. But I mean, like, still, like breaking down the vocabulary of the world is worthwhile.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so he Genly goes there and he meets with the king of Esther, being Estraven's father or grandfather. No, father, right? Um,
Yes, father.
and wouldn't you know it, he meets Estraven's son too, and the three of them have a brief conversation, and that is how the book ends. The three of them talking together in Esther. It's not as simple as all that, and I do think the dialogue and the exchange that those characters have is important, and we'll come back to that. But I think that's kind of like the summation of our final chapter here. Connor, I want to ask you is with this previous chapter and this last chapter here. Um, did you remember how this book was going to end? Like, was reading through these last two chapters kind of like, oh yeah, totally, or was it sort of like you're relearning things? What was your
Yeah.
experience like reading it?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been like I'll remember moments, like I remembered Estraven's death, obviously. I remember the conversation in this chapter with the king. But yeah, so it was like pockets of memories that just slotted in as I was reading.
Now you know how it feels.
Yeah. This is what Josh has been dealing with all along.
Well, except for not kind of with Lord of the Rings, because I've seen the movies, so I kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
had a bit of that.
Yeah, the one part that I forgot about this chapter was generally in the beginning of the chapter is taken into a prison again, or a holding station or whatever, and the difference between the this accommodation and the farm is pretty extreme. Um,
Yeah.
but when he like would sleep, like he always goes back to that cold truck that he's stuck in with those people and the being transported and with the dead body and everything. That's a memory he keeps on going back to, being in captivity again and slowly recovering from whatever hypothermia or whatever, his body being just totally destroyed by his traveling across the ice for so long.
Yeah.
So we talked before, like the majority of this chapter generally is kind of in a bit of a haze. He's kind of in recovery, and it reminds me too of, like, I think it's like the last chapter of Catcher in the Rye, and I'll just leave that. I'll just say that, for
We
people
might be
who haven't read.
we might be
For
reading that
people who
book
haven't read
next.
Catcher in the Rye, I don't want to drop any spoilers,
La 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 la.
but but yeah, yeah, it does kind of feel like both an epilogue and final chapter, as Josh said. And yeah, with when he goes to find closure, with meeting Estraven's family, and it's up to you to decide if what he got was enough. To it's I don't know. I think for some people it would be, for others it's not. But I think it's realistic.
Yeah. Josh, what say you? What did you think reading this last chapter here?
I think I mentioned at the beginning, like it's a little disappointing in the fact that it's open ended and not a there's no true closure. I mean, I think it even says at the end, Genly doesn't really feel closure. He's wondering why he's even there in Estra. And I kind of feel that the same way reading the book, but I don't know, the last paragraph gives you a little bit of hope that he's going to start telling the story and that'll help him heal. Um, I'm a little confused when Estraven's son basically says, like, what's next? Or no, he doesn't say anything. Estraven gently just says, "The king will recant. Therum is no traitor. What does it matter what fools called him?" But then Estraven's father basically just slowly nods and says, "It matters." I was like, "All right." So is he rebuking gently there in a gentle way of, like, actually it does kind of matter, but I'm sorry, or is he agreeing with gently in that it doesn't matter what the fools say, it matters what was true. I don't know. It's I read it as a mild rebuke because Genly still doesn't fully understand how Githanian culture works, but it's still a little open ended.
Yeah,
depending on how you read it.
I do, like, I took that as Genly not understanding that it matters. Like, Genly's like, who cares, because Estraven's dead, so they could call him whatever he wants. right, the king saying, no, it does matter what they call him. I think that is kind of
I think
tied.
I agree with what you're saying, but I think that Genly was saying it doesn't matter because Estrian was not a traitor. It doesn't matter what fools say. What matters is that Estrian was a good man.
Well, yes, but I
I
do think there's like a Gathenian cultural, because like we learn so much about the power of names in this book. It's a
yeah
really big deal when they're in the tent and Genly says, call me Genly. You don't have to call me Mr. I. And Estravan is like, Therum. There's a
yeah
big difference between calling him Therum or Estravan, or, like there just are moments in this book that Le Guin makes it very clear that like the way in which you address a character is like tied to um your relationship with them and your perception of them, and like what, and that's true in a lot of aspects of our own lives. It's like even like having a nickname with someone or whatever it is. And so I think that is like all kind of caught up in this idea of like it does matter what you call someone. And even though Estraven's dead, it does matter if if people think he's a traitor or not, because it's like um I don't know. I think it's like more than just like respect or whatever. It's more than just Shifgrathor. There's something else there, but I do think it's something that Genly doesn't understand. I guess
yeah
I guess that's the best I can say.
okay yeah I don't know what I was trying to say was that if Genly is when Genly is saying that what it doesn't matter what fools say, he was no traitor. I think he's in his own language, in his own manner of speech, trying to say, "Don't worry what they think. Here's what I think." And I think he's saying like it doesn't, their opinion doesn't matter. I spent way more time. I got to know them way more than they ever did, and they're wrong. Is kind of what he's trying to say.
Yeah, I think you're right, and then also that's a foreign concept
To the
uh
Gathenians, yes.
to the Gathenians, yeah. Um,
So looping back
which
around to
which
your original. Oh, sorry. Go
is
ahead.
something that will see probably seep into them as they ingratiate themselves within the Ecumen. Um,
Hopefully.
yeah,
But yeah. So to loop back around to your original question, the the ending was not satisfying, but as I said at the beginning, I think it's supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
It's supposed to leave you a little hollow inside. It's supposed to leave you wondering what comes next because that's what Genly's going through.
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it does mirror that. Talking about like what people's thoughts are on Estraven's death. One thing I really want to make sure we discuss is that Genly is kind of like musing and wondering, could it be that Estraven killed himself? Like the beginning of this
Mm-hmm.
chapter, he's reflecting on his death and he's thinking like, Estraven must have known what was going to happen. So did he commit suicide? And he says this out loud to the physician who's treating him, and the physician is like deeply offended. And it goes back to
Yep.
that idea, like suicide is like the most heinous like crime you can commit on Gethin. I think that like it was like the one thing that's worse than thievery is suicide. And so it's like,
yeah,
Yeah.
suddenly Genly's grappling with this idea of like, did Estraven do like theoretically the worst thing you can do on Gethin? And the reaction is very strong, from other characters, where it's like, how dare you say that about Estraven? The thing that's like very, very interesting too, talking about kind of the Christ allegory from before, but in this chapter, the book itself directly references um, the Bible and Christianity. It says the
Oh, you're right. It
ultimate
does.
right. Le Guin and Genly is writing that the ultimate crime of Judas on Gethin would not be his betrayal of Jesus. I guess this was the other thing that made me think of Estraven as like the Christ allegory, because that would
Yep.
mean that the farmer is Judas, right? And so the from the Gethenian perspective, the crime of Judas would not be his betrayal of Christ. It would be his suicide after having done so. That is
Yes.
what he would go down in history as having been like this reprehensible figure before, which obviously is like a crazy perspective. But like, I love that idea that like these aliens would have this take on a human religion, and the ways in which that they might like incorporate that or understand it through their like their alien lens.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway,
I
so it
mean,
kind
you
of
got to be careful with the term alien and human in that context, but yes.
yeah. But so it kind of comes down to like Genly being like, it's I don't know. It's like, does Estraven kill himself? The chapter does illuminate that a little bit more, but I guess I was wondering, did either of you sort of have a take on that? In feeling like, does he commit suicide, or is it suicide if he knows what's coming? If indeed he does know.
It feels like he knew he was going to die there, but went anyway, and I think it's up to interpretation if that is a noble sacrifice or a suicide. Because
Yeah.
he's doing this out of a form of love for his countrymen and patriotism.
Does
And
does the nobility make it not a suicide though? Is a self-sacrifice not suicide?
I think there's a different connotation there. When I think self sacrifice, I think like jumping on a grenade, holding off the hordes as your companions escape. Um, Duncan, holding off the Sudakar in Dune. Um, I mean, yes, that is a suicidal thing to do, but the way it's executed makes it not suicide. Suicide is more it has more of a cowardly context and I mean, kind of like yes, it's the Gathenians see it as like the most heinous of crimes, but I mean their interpretation of it is not far off from how we see it in general uh, in our modern day society. It's usually not viewed as a good thing, and I think recently, within the last couple decades, it's seeing more as a failing of society more than a failing of the person. But it's still a very complicated and controversial topic that people are not comfortable talking about, and I don't know. It's not something I'm prepared to talk about right now, unfortunately.
No, you've said it well. That was well said. I think I mean I think yeah, there's a very different connotation between self-sacrifice and somebody killing themselves because they can't bear to live on. But it's the same act, really. It is just it boils down to the finer details and how we look at these things. And so do the Gathenians make that distinction? I don't know if Estervan wasn't a traitor, would it be, oh, it's noble self-sacrifice? I don't know. But it's something more to chew on.
Yeah. Yeah. For what it's worth, I I don't know. I don't feel like Estraven. I guess I'm sort of with Josh. Where I'm like, I don't feel like Estraven committed suicide. I feel like he killed himself, and it's like, you know,
It's a
uh,
fine line to draw.
Yeah, like patriotism and nationalism,
yeah,
Exactly.
or male
Um,
and female.
yes, yeah. I think I my take is it was not like, I think he knew he had a very slim chance of surviving that run in, but I think it was in the service of making a clear path for Genly to
Yeah.
probably survive. So in that way, yeah, I don't think I think it's fair to not call it suicide, but it's also fair to call, yeah, you're going into
Well,
your probable death.
yeah, and actually, like as you lay it out there, I think the thing that really changes it for me. So, like, say there Estraven realizes he has a 99% chance of dying and a 1% chance of survival. I really think the thing that makes it not suicide is that Estraven feels like those are the best odds afforded to him given this situation. And he's
Yeah.
banking on the 1% versus the 99. When he takes off on those skis, he's not thinking he's going into certain death. He's thinking, I just might make it out of here against all odds.
Yeah.
And, his luck just eventually runs out. Um, but I think that's the key difference. And I think that's kind of like the Gethenian perspective. That's almost like the loophole in this situation where if he were going into that thinking like, well, I'm dead for sure. And obviously, I'm making an assumption here based on what I know about Estraven's character because we don't get his thoughts on the matter. But given how Estraven has been portrayed and what he's said prior, I feel like he thinks that whatever his slim chance is just might be the way he can scrape by the skin of his teeth,
Yeah.
and yet the overwhelming odds just are not able to be overcome finally, and he meets his end.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
um I gotta I don't know if they're uh, can I read through a few notes and then I'm assuming what we want to talk about is kind of at the very end with the conversation between the King of Esther, Estraven's son, and Genly. Is that
Sure. Yeah,
is
that's
that
fine.
okay? So I'm gonna do my own lightning round here. So there's this line here. It says Tybe has his defeat and his revenge all in one, meaning that like when Tybe sends the order to kill Genly, the pieces are already in place for him to fall. So it's sort of like this futile effort, and I thought that was really interesting. And
Heroic victory.
yeah, and I like that. I like that we get a conclusion on like the whole thing with Tybe. Genly has this line. He says, I must set the keystone in the arch." I really like that there's like this full circle moment. There's a lot of full circle moments actually in this book, and we've talked about some of them already. But there's this full circle moment here of obviously the first chapter and the last chapter mentioning the keystone here. But even like the second chapter and the second to last chapter, because the second chapter is the place inside the blizzard with the fable, and then the second to last chapter is like Estraven and Genly as brothers and Estraven's death. And there's kind of like this symmetry to the structure of the book. And I was thinking too, it's like the book is exactly 20 chapters. And so it feels like Le Guin sort of has the book structured as exactly two halves. And you have like left hand, right hand, light and dark, Estraven and Genly, 10 chapters, 10 chapters. And she's sort of I cannot imagine this is true for every chapter, but again, like my memory of those first two chapters is fairly strong. And so like the way these last two chapters ends, there's kind of like parallels between those two at the very least. And obviously the parallels are intentional, and so it's like it feels like structurally Le Guin is sort of playing with this idea of like the mirroring and the I don't know, those like two opposite halves within like her own book. 10 chapters, 10 chapters. Um, when Genly makes it to the kingdom of Karhide, he passes Estraven's former house, and he mentions like the emptiness of it, and it's like this such a stinging, familiar detail in the ways in which like death haunts the living. There's like these reminders of like the separation of our. There's like a former pattern. The thing that made me think of is like losing my first dog, and like it's just like with walking up the stairs. You see your dog every day. Every day is a step, and
Yep.
eventually you're used to that, and there's one last step and they're not there, and like there's like that feeling of
Loss.
yeah, but even more than loss, it's like, and I know that this is something that we're all familiar with, but it's like you come home to a house where a dog used to be and it's not there anymore. That's what
Yeah.
it felt like when Genly sees Estraven's house is empty. It's like that's like the monument to his death in some ways. Um the it's the of something. Like it's not even that, like, this is gonna sound so fucking stupid because this word is now being used and but it's like it's almost like it's not even that Estraven's dead. The Yomesh might say he's unalive, and that and and again, completely separate from the fucking dumbass internet
Yes.
lingo.
Yep.
But it's like there is like some sort of idea there of like, I don't know.
This is a great way to get Gen Z to read this book. This could be a
Yes.
viral TikTok moment.
Yes. Yeah. No. Please take these last 10 or 15 seconds and stick it in a TikTok. We have TikTok, don't we, Connor?
Sure.
I thought we did.
Yeah.
I thought you made a TikTok. You
There is
made a
a
whole thing to do about it for a while.
Well, no.
No,
I
you
think I joked.
did.
I joked for a long time. No, we're gonna be into TikTok this year. I did
I
make an
thought.
account.
I know you
I
did.
did make an
I
account.
know you made an account.
I
Yeah.
don't. I think I. But yeah, fuck it. We'll start it up.
Let's do it now.
Let's do it now. Let's do it now.
Unalived.
Yeah, Estraven unalived himself.
Yes. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. So Estraven does not betray king or country. This must come from the conversation between Genly and King Argivan. Estraven does not betray king or country. He loved his country, and like, and so the king is all like, so what are you talking about? Genly says he served the master I serve, mankind.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly where I got my thought about the delineation difference between patriotism and nationalism. I think that's where I draw the line, I think.
Totally.
So I interpreted that line as a bit of humanist philosophy, in that, I mean, it's. I first heard the term humanist back in like middle school or early high school, and that it just stuck with me for some reason. It's just like the idea that just humanity comes first. It's kind of what Star Trek is, in that it's like, I mean, they expand to include the other races, but in Star Trek, all the other races are just humans with wrinkly foreheads, or pointy ears. So it's just this idea that the human should come first, and life is what's most important when you're trying to figure something out that's difficult. So when Estraven was presented with something very difficult, he decided that serving mankind was better than serving the king, and that's why he was ultimately exiled. It again, bringing it back to Star Trek, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and I think that's what Estraven decided in the end.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, agreed. And talking about Estroven again, Genly makes note of I think art. I don't know. I'm going through my notes here, so I don't know all the specifics. But on page 315, um, Argiven is commenting on something that is done, and Genly says that was Estroven's counsel, and it was right. And I just wanted to point that moment out because it's such a 180 for Genly to acknowledge Estroven's counsel, to say it was right, to say it was the right thing to do. Like, it just shows obviously a lot of development from Genly and like his relationship with Estroven.
Definitely. Yeah, that was about contacting the ship, radioing the ship before talking to King Argiven.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, good shout out. Right. Yeah, because Argiven is like, why'd you do it? He's like, I didn't even choose to do that. And it's my fucking mission. I did it because Estroven told me to, and I trusted him. And it's like, wow, big change for him.
Definitely.
Page 316. The phrase "car hide first" is mentioned, and
yeah.
And then Johnny's like, yeah, whatever.
it turns out
okay.
Argiven has this red hat on that just says "car hide first." Where has someone made those? Where's that hat?
Probably up there. Grok,
to bring
make
it to the
this
real
image.
world.
Yes,
America First has been around far longer than 2015, and that's why people were so quick to point it out, because the last people who used it were not the best kind of people that you wanted running the country either.
Right. Yeah, and that's sort of the thing where it's like, talking about putting mankind first, wherever that idea comes from. It's like that's to put needs of the many over the few, needs the needs of mankind as a whole over like the power of a singular nation at the
It's really
expense of
funny.
others.
It's really funny reading this because last night I was like on YouTube and there's like these live streams where they just like show old shows, like they just like live stream old shows on these channels and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's legal or not, but they do it. And
Probably not.
And they were live streaming all of Farscape. Have you ever seen Farscape, the show Farscape?
I've heard of it. Apparently, there's a lot of alumni crossover with Stargate in the later seasons.
Yeah, so I watched a few episodes of that last night, and one of them is like they get back to Earth and they're like introducing them to these alien worlds and stuff, and the whole thing is like America wants all this technology to themselves, and it's like, and then they have to like they argue like, oh no, this is for all nations, and eventually they just convince the head of NASA or whatever to be like, yeah, okay, it's for everybody. And it's like I was like, oh man, that would be so nice if like people could actually
what Stargate did with that. Stargate did with that is like, oh, we're gonna form an international committee and like secret government kind of shit, which is kind of like the theme of the show. But there is some international politics of like, well, China believes that all the people of China should know the secrets, and watching that today, it's just you're laughing at the TV with how blatantly false that notion is. It's I don't know, similar themes.
Yeah, definitely. It's just like I like it's idealized because the Farscape that came out in 2003. So even then, it's like that was idealized. Like that was still post 9/11. So that's not reality at all. But back then, you're like thinking like, oh man, like yeah, this could happen. Like that, like this could be the happy ending for Disclosure or whatever. But it's like
that's actually what I was the episode of Stargate I was referring to specifically is called Disclosure.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Anyways, I just thought that was a funny thing to happen upon last night.
Yeah.
Cool.
A lot of connective tissue there for sure. Another thing about Genly's growth. So when Genly organizes the other Ecumen, coming down and how they're going to be received, he notes that like everyone has to come out on his suggestion, that no one can remain in the ship. And Genly notes, the book notes, otherwise it would impugn their Shifrathor of the welcoming party. This was another thing where we've talked so much about how Genly doesn't understand Shifrathor. It feels like at the end of the book and after Estraven's death and after all, like this is a moment that shows that Genly is fully aware and immersed within Gathenian culture, and he understands Shifgrathor finally.
Yeah, it's so interesting that it's like it wouldn't be until this moment. Like if the ship came down any sooner, like he wouldn't have been able to walk them through it so masterfully. Like he had to endure this long, arduous journey and really peel back all the layers of their society and Shifgrathor to really understand it. And I mean, does he understand it fully? That's debatable. I think he has enough of it where he can tread the water carefully enough to get by.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's a big part of his journey. That with all that is left unresolved. That I think this is a very much an endpoint for his adventure, his journey there.
Yes. And my final note before we get to the last page, and then we can have our big discussion of the end of this chapter here, and then we'll get to our final thoughts. So when Genly welcomes the Ecumen, there's a woman who steps out among them first, and she says, "Oh, Genly, I didn't know you." And I felt like this was another important line because, Genly is fully alienated. Connor was talking about how, well, we've talked about this, but like earlier in this discussion, Connor mentioned how Estraven is an alien among his own people. This is like such a telling line because it shows like Genly, through his experiences on Gethin, is now himself an alien from the Ecumen, from his fellow humans.
Yeah.
And so it's like throughout the whole book, even when the people from the starship come down, the very people who traveled with Genly from Hain Davenant or wherever the fuck he came from, within the scope of the book, within what we read as readers, the only character to fully see and perceive and understand Genly is Estraven, and it stops there. No other character has the closeness or the relationship to Genly, and I love the starkness and the disparity, because it's like you could end the book even without any other humans coming down from the starship at all very easily. You could just say the starship lands, and you know what I mean. And yet, Le Guin still writes this sequence of Genly finally like being reunited with people, for people of his own race, and it only serves to highlight Genly's alien nature and his inability to be perceived in exactly the same way that Estraven struggled with his own people as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's also a line in there about how he felt uncomfortable with the men and women, because they were not they seemed alien to him as well.
Look at these pervs.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you were all perverts.
Okay, hey, talking about perverts, I have one weird line about the last page, and then like I have actual stuff to talk about. But like we're gonna talk about like this conversation is now moving towards, this is Genly and Estraven's father and Estraven's son having their final conversation.
I just want to let you know, guys, I have like an hour left maximum, and
fine.
I kind of gotta pee.
Do you want to take a quick?
I'll take a tight two for my one, for my tight one.
Tight two.
All right.
Okay.
Take a tight two for a tight one.
Sounds good. We'll be right back.
Is not new music out. It's that I'm not listening to new music, man.
Yeah, you're in one of those phases.
I know. I really am. But
the new Turnstile is gonna come out next month too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Anyways, y'all ready?
All set.
Yes.
All right. Let's jump back into it. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay. So before I get into my note that I was about to discuss, and before we get into our last page, as we're gearing up for, I wanted to make mention that I was at I go out and I buy beer. I like to drink, and I often do on the podcast.
How dare
Well,
you?
I know. I couldn't help. I came across this thing. I'd never seen it before. Anyways, this is an Einstock Arctic Lager.
Wow.
And I was like, you know what? This is on brand for our discussion. So I'm gonna crack open one of these here.
I honestly thought you were about to pull out like a wintergreen pack of gum.
Nope, it's alcohol.
Yeah, that one could imagine that's maybe that is the lager they had when they got to that village and stayed at that inn.
Yeah, I should have
Nosh
heated
or
this
whatever it
up in a
was.
saucepan or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
How was it?
It's good. It's it
I'll
it
take your word for it.
is crisp and hoppy at the same time.
Crisp and hoppy. Wow, that sounds delightful.
Yeah, it's good. So anyways, this is what I was going to talk about. So on the last page here, I said I had a note that like doesn't matter before we get into the stuff that does matter, and I don't know if it's just me who's confused about this. I have to ask and find out. I'm talking about the last page here, which in our books is page 323. It says, the king says at the top, "This is Sorv Harth," he said, "heir of Esther, my son's son." Then it goes on to say, "There is no ban on incest here. I knew it well enough. Only the strangeness of it, to me, a Terran, and the strangeness of seeing the flash of my friend's spirit in this grim, fierce provincial boy made me dumb for a while." Okay, here's what I need to say about this. Because in my mind, it would make perfect sense. Okay, Estraven's father is the king of Esther. No questions asked. That's how kingship works. Estraven has a son. Estraven's son is the heir of Esther because Estraven is exiled and dead. Okay, completely. Why is incest being mentioned here? Is there an implication that the king and Estraven or Estraven and his brother? I mean, what is the implication here?
I think the implication is that it's Estraven and his brother. I think it's his brother and his kid.
I was not getting that at all. I was, maybe it's because I was reading it at like 11 p.m., but I could not figure out why that was.
Yeah,
being
I'm
mentioned.
forgetting now if it's mentioned outright at any point, but I'm fairly certain that is the intention here.
I mean, it feels like it makes the most sense now.
Yeah, I feel like we may have mentioned it earlier, but I don't know. We also see
we might just get the parable of the two brothers, and that is maybe meant to make us presume. But yeah, I'm not sure if it's ever defined.
And that's the thing with what you're talking about, Josh, because we know that Estraven has this other lover, this other Kemmer mate, Ash.
Yep.
And so if there was no line about the incest here, you would very readily just assume, oh, well, this is Estraven's kid from his other relationship with that. But no,
that's exactly what I assumed.
I know, but that can't be it, because why else would Genly be saying, oh, there's no ban against incest here? It must be because Estraven and his brother had this child together. And it makes so much sense when you think about the different parables, the different fables, like Connor was mentioning, and the relationship that Estraven comes to have with Genly, and the ways in which they are kind of like both lovers and brothers, not in the fullest regard of those things, as it seems like Estraven was with his brother. But it's like it feels like it's all pointing in that direction, and this line really threw me off, and I was like, "What is it?" But yeah, it feels like it must be final like confirmation or whatever of
Yeah.
Estraven and his brother having that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's yeah, you're right. It you know, I guess it is kind of like an oh shit moment reading it for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I put it together, so I was just kind of like, that's weird that they're bringing up the incest thing again. But
Yeah.
it's 11 o'clock and I got to get to bed, and I ended up still
You're like,
reading
I'm gonna
the
have weird dreams tonight.
no, God no. I also ended up reading the Gathenian calendar and clock appendix. Because
Oh
I
yeah,
wanted to.
I didn't read any of those, so
I know you didn't, but
I browsed
the
and I
yeah,
read the
thanks.
afterward though too.
I skipped the afterword this time. Again, it was late, and I just
Yeah,
wanted
no,
to
I mean usually I'm the one that does
go to
that.
bed at that
look
point.
at us.
I think you
We're
guys
a
would get a
mess.
lot out of it. It talks about a lot of the themes we've been discussing. Of course, obviously we read the same book, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I did once I finished reading these two chapters, I was like, man, gotta put the book down, gotta process this. I told
Yeah.
myself I was gonna come back and read those things prior to our discussion. Well, wouldn't you know it, I didn't do that. But I
No, they're
do.
not essential.
No, they're not, but I
Yeah,
still am interested in reading them.
the calendar helps a little bit. It explains how the days work. There's a bit more of um, the naming grammar for the days of the month, and it gives you the actual month. So like all those weird italic names that we kept reading in Estraven's journal, that was just day and month. I think
Right.
we mentioned it because I did glance in the back when we were in that part of the book. But I found the explanation on the like the gravity of winter versus Terra and the length of the hour and how it's measured. I think they go from noon to noon instead of midnight to midnight, and their hours are like 2.5 of ours. It was interesting, but yeah,
Yeah.
not essential for understanding the story unless you really need to visualize what the third hour of the day looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, just like how after I finished reading Return of the King, I never went back and read the appendices, so
Well, it's a good thing I did and was able to tell you things like Sam is not named Sam.
I know he's like fucking Zanzibar or whatever.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that.
um okay, so wrapping up here, Connor, any thoughts on this like final meeting of Genly, Estraven's father, Estraven's son, like this final meeting, this final discussion that they have here, the very conclusion of the story. Is there anything you wanted to share on that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's different rereading it a little bit, but for me, with a memory like mine, it feels almost like reading it for the first time. It feels like reading it for the first time, but also having like a what you deja vu or something,
Yes, yeah.
which is interesting. But I really enjoyed the last chapter. I love the note that it ends on. I don't know. I'm not gonna say like I prefer uncertainty in stories, but a lot of the time I do. Like a lot of the time it really feels right to me because it feels true to life. And it's nice to wrap things up, and I think some stories that is fitting. But I was really happy with the note it ended on, and I felt like especially Estervin's father, his reaction to the news of his son, and the passage about their discussion about him being a traitor. I think that all rings true. Like, of course, his father is set in his ways, and he's an uh, old stick in the mud that is bound to these norms, you know. So it all really felt right to me that Genly didn't exactly get what he wanted uh, from Estrven's father. And then yeah, like seeing a bit of a ghost in his son. It's I don't know. It made me really feel, like I said before, it made me feel a mixture of like hope and despair and warmth and coldness and just yeah, it made me feel, you know, human, like the just the that duality you kind of live in as a human, with the highs and lows and uh I don't know, being able to feel a relief and also dread at the same time. And it's uh, I don't know, I don't have the words to adequately describe it, but I had that kind of feeling. And I enjoyed I enjoyed it.
Mm, indeed. Josh, anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so in this instance. I think I kind of covered how I felt about the ending a couple times already in this podcast. Um,
Well, do it again. No, I don't. That's all good.
it kind of was right. It's open ended and ambiguous, and that's kind of how the story is meant to work in the end, ultimately. So
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to I mean, I agree it's open ended. It is. But um I also felt like because it is the ending, um, like it's worth considering why does Le Guin choose to end the story in this manner and at this point in the narrative. So the way it ends, um, it goes like this. It says, "You crossed the Gorban ice together," Sorv demanded. "You and he?" "We did." "I should like to hear that tale, my lord envoy," said old Esvins, very calm. But the boy, Theron's son, said, stammering, "Will you tell us how he died? Will you tell us about the other worlds out among the stars, the other kinds of men, the other lives?" And my take on this is, for all the open-endedness of it, um, Connor's mentioning like this feeling of hope and like many other conflicting kind of emotions, but like I do think that like this uh passage, this ending is meant to leave you with this feeling of hope even after like the death of Estraven and the depression that Genly's living through, because there's I feel like Estraven's son, Sorv here, is meant to be kind of like a, essentially like a rebirth of Estraven in some way, or like representative of this idea that like, you know, just like how the story takes place within some set of time called the Hainish cycle, right? I think that like the way that this story ends is meant to point you towards like this cyclical idea of that despite Estraven being dead, like the spirit of Estraven lives on through his child. And like we see the ways in which just one person, Estraven, essentially can change the fate and the nature of an entire planet, because essentially everything that's happening now, the starship coming down and the Gethenians joining the Ecumen, and you know if you tie all that back to the reasons why these different like actions occur, it's basically all Estraven. Estraven. This is Estraven's accomplishment. He's just not alive to see it. And so it's not so simple as to say like, oh, so that means that Estraven's son is going to be just as consequential and just as important. Like that's not the point. The point is that um that's I don't know. I felt like this book just left me with this idea of, not taking death as a loss, and seeing the ways in which like people's actions and spirit can like reverberate beyond just their individual life, you know, and like their corporeal form. And it's like, I guess kind of this realization or this idea where it's like, yes, Estraven is dead, but is Estraven gone when he's the one who was instrumental in creating this great change for Gethin, and essentially the history of Gethin going forward and joining the Ecumen is largely the responsibility of Estraven. Like, is Estraven truly dead if he's the reason that this monumental shift in the you know, the history of this planet going forward until the end of the time, you know? And it's like, and not only that, but like his son here, like Estraven's father is like very calm and even keel and whatever, but Estraven's son, he has this curious nature about him. He has the same desire as Estraven. Like Estraven wanted to kind of like reach out beyond the stars, and you know, he wanted this union of the Ecumen and the Gethenians. And so it's like it feels like that passion and curiosity and desire lives on like through his son, who also wants to know, like, tell us about these other lives, these other people. And so I'm just gonna stop here and just say yes, the ending is absolutely not conclusive, totally open ended. But my big caveat after my whole ramble here is I think you're meant to step away with kind of like this bittersweet positive feeling of like Estraven's goal is accomplished, and his son is representative of the ways in which like the Gethenians can grow and move forward into this like next phase of their lives, you know, like as this new people.
No, absolutely. I think that's super valid of an interpretation, and it's even you know, foreshadowed or signposted in that parable with the son coming back and reuniting with the father and ending the conflict between the two
Yes.
the two families. So yeah, except this is on a much larger scale, on a universal scale, where this conflict ends. So yeah, no, I think we're totally meant to think that, and that is where that optimism, that hope comes from. Yeah, but you're right, it's a bittersweet kind of hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that all being said,
it's a lot.
Do we want to share our final thoughts? We can just each go around as we do. Dear listeners, you know the drill. We're each gonna have our platform here, say our piece, give our general thoughts on the book as a whole, maybe respond a little bit here and there, but basically just tell us what did you think of the book, and after our little speech, we will rank the book.
Rate it. We don't rank it.
You're right. We will rate the book. We should rank all the books.
At the last episode of the podcast.
That's kind of what the spreadsheet is doing, in that I'm getting average scores from all of us. So there are numbers attached to the books we've read so far, but
so they are ranked in that regard.
They're not in any sort of order currently. No, they are rated. And if we wanted to rank them if we wanted to rate them at
Josh, but
if we wanted to rank them at a later date,
oh my god, no! What I'm saying is they are already ranked by virtue of them being rated. You just don't have them in order. We don't have to do anything to rank them.
All right, moving on. Who wants to go first?
Score of
all right,
of our
who wants
scores.
to go first?
So that means all you have to do is order them, and they're ranked.
Yes.
But they're not ranked yet until they're ordered. That's what I'm trying to say.
All right.
Anyway.
Okay, guys. Ready? Let's talk. Ready for the final thoughts.
All right.
Yes, final thoughts.
Connor, do you want to start then? You sound like you're ready.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, I mean, when I first read this book, I loved it. It was really this really was I read it like during COVID when COVID first happened, and I had a lot of time to read. And I loved diving into the world, and I learned about humanity and society and myself, and yeah, gender, and just all kinds of things that kind of I felt like I was opened up to even more during that time. And this read through of it was super rewarding, because going through it with you guys has been awesome, hearing different perspectives and different being able to verbalize my thoughts on it with my friends has been super fun, and something I did look forward to every week. And just kind of appreciating the book on a different level, because having reading through it partially, knowing what's going to happen, knowing the the broad brush strokes after 5 years or something, almost 5 years of not reading it. It's been great. I love the detail, I love the story, I love the world building. But most of all, like I just really love the characters. I really love Genly and Estervin, and all the little one-off characters are kind of fleshed out in their own ways and seem true to life to me. And I don't know. I definitely got a lot out of this read through. This is hard. This is a tough one for me. I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna give it a stupid rating. I think I'm gonna give it an 8.75 out of 10.
That's not
Hey,
what's stupid about that.
I don't know. I just feel like the 0.75. It's like, come on, is that really necessary, dude? Like, do you
I
really
gave
need to?
It's
I
it's your
gave
it's
That
your
is so
rating,
fine.
dude. It's your rating. I don't know.
I know, but
I
that's
gave Lord of the Rings overall a 7.99, so don't worry about a
okay. All right,
0.75.
fair enough.
But then again you also gave The Hobbit a 4,200 out of 4,300. So
Yeah, and that was a totally serious rating. So,
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, so that's all I gotta say, I think.
cool.
Okay. Okay. Um, Josh, do you want to go next, or shall I go next?
Um, I can go. I'll probably forget what I'm thinking of right now if I wait any longer. Um, this was certainly an interesting book. I'm really glad you brought it up to us 2 Christmases ago. And it really has been interesting seeing how this book that is 60, 70 years old still applies. It still reflects our modern society. Um, it has been a bit of a mirror in which to view our current society and culture. And but at the same time, some of the language I feel hurts it reading it in the modern day. And I think we've talked about it before, but referring to every Githinian as he kind of defeats the modern sensibility of the fact that they are uh, intergender, intersex. And so I found myself every time thinking of everybody as male, as a default. Um, unless an individual was described as displaying overtly feminine traits, like that councilman who was trying to seduce Estrafade in that one chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know. It's made me a bit more cognizant of like gender nonconforming people in when I come across that sort of thing on the internet. It's reminding me of people I knew in college who were definitely not conforming to gender norms and maybe understand what they were going through a little bit better. Uh, but I don't know. There was something about this book that didn't fully click, and I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's the fact that we just took a little too long reading it, but it's. I don't want to say it doesn't stand out, but it's not. Maybe it's just. I think it's me. I don't think it's the book. I think it's me. I think I'm going through just a difficult time in my personal life and having just not having the energy to fully absorb the book, even though I've been reading it, I've been enthralled in it every time. Um, I wasn't fall. I don't feel like I was in danger of falling asleep at any point, like I was with Lord of the Rings. I think I just need more rest personally. Maybe this is just because I didn't sleep at all last night, but um, it's a good book, and I'm glad you brought it up and that we could read it together. And I feel like I said with every book that I'm so glad we could read it together because I don't know if I would have read it otherwise.
Mhm.
And I don't think it's changed any of my perspectives, but I think it's focused a lot of my perspectives. Um, so yeah, it's a good book. I feel like I was missing a lot more of the nuance, and that's why I'm glad that we I'm sorry. I feel like I was missing a lot of the nuance when I was reading it myself, and that's why I'm glad we're doing this podcast because you help point these things out to me. Just in this very episode, Connor pointing out the freedom aspects of their return from the glacier hadn't even crossed my mind. The incest thing, I was glossing over that when I was reading it last week because I wanted to get to the end, and it was an uncomfortable topic that is a part of their culture that it's uncomfortable in our modern culture, in our bisexual culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it was something I just kind of glossed over. It's like, all right, this is something that's being brought up in the last paragraph. I don't know why, but it doesn't feel like it at the time. It didn't feel like it was connecting anything, and this was a chapter that felt like it was supposed to leave things open ended. So it's like, all right, I'll just leave it open ended in my head. And then you brought that connection around to Esterman's brother, and there's less open ended threads than I thought there were. So
Yeah.
that's good. Um. So yeah, good book overall. I wish I was in a slightly better headspace to finish it off, but I definitely wish we could have read through it faster. But that's not how things turned out. So that's life. That's kind of what the book is about. That's life. Things don't always go the way you want it to. I think I have to rate this. I don't have to, but I feel like I should be rating this somewhere in the mid sevens out of 10. So I'm gonna go with a 7.5 out of 10. And
Yeah.
that's again these are personal ratings, and they do not reflect the overall quality of the book. They just I view this rating as how much did I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Totally fair.
yeah, I'm saying this for the audience. I actually when we first started reading the book, we were maybe 2 or 3 episodes in. I was talking about it with a friend from college, and he immediately started gushing over the book and how much he really loved it and how it opened his eyes, and that's great for him. I wish I'd had that level of moment of like revelation that he had, and I I don't feel like I had that in the end, but I do feel like I'm better off for having read the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it comes down to when in your life you're reading this too. You know, I mean, there's a difference between reading it at 22 and or 32. You know, so that makes total sense to me. And just the
Perhaps.
world is just it changes. So
Yeah, and maybe part of it is the fact that it was such a strong reflection of the modern world, and I didn't enjoy that
totally,
particular aspect of it because I
yeah,
don't enjoy the current state of the world in many ways. And being when I go to read a book, I'm trying to escape that for a little while.
Fair enough. 7.5. Connor?
Got it. Yeah, well, I'm going to be echoing a bit more of what Josh was saying here for sure, because
what revelation disappointed you and ruined the story for you? Let's get it over with.
no. This book doesn't
It
have
was
that.
It was that incest wasn't. It was that partners had to separate after they.
Yeah, right.
After they gave birth to their incestual
that really
child.
brought it down in my estimation. No, I kind of felt like I never got hooked by this book for as much as I enjoyed it, and I did. So I definitely agree with Josh, where it's like there's a lot of aspects and parts to this book that I like, and I think it is a good book, like full stop. Um, but I also kind of have a hard time figuring out like what is it about this book that did not fully connect with me, and I think Josh is right to point out that our reading schedule could be one of the things that affected it this go around, because this book was kind of plagued with like big breaks in
Yeah.
between like important things happening within the text, and it's like it's tough if you forget things because Le Guin's you know not necessarily a dense writer, but like the things that she's those like little 4-page fables, they matter. Like that's
Yep.
part of the book, and if you're losing things or not everything is as fresh in your mind, I absolutely think that could be something that could kind of hamstring your reading experience, and so I think that should be acknowledged. um Another thing I agree with Josh about is um the ways in which this book explored gender and like the gender dichotomy and like fluidness of the Gethenians.
For lack thereof.
Yeah, is like very, and the thing is like I think that the referral of all the Gethenians as he, you know, you could argue that is itself a commentary, because we get to the end, and when Genly first quote unquote sees Estraven in the tent, Genly writes in his journal saying like that he was scared to make that realization. It was kind of the subconscious thing that he was suppressing. And so it's like, potentially you can apply that to the ways in which Genly makes note of other Gethenians as well. Um, and so it's like, are we getting a skewed perspective on all Gethenians because Genly is our POV character? And so it's like, is there sort of a commentary on Genly's perspective as sort of like this flawed masculine point of view character? A little bit, I think. The thing where I think that kind of falls apart is you would then want to have a clear point of comparison and separation when you get to like Estraven chapters. And I'm not saying that that's not there. Josh even made a point of talking about the chapter with Estraven and the person trying to seduce him in Kemmer. But I just feel like the way it's written, maybe it's a modern audience thing. I just don't feel like that fully translates or works. And so part of me is sort of left like, how much of this is intentional and how much is this sort of like a product of its time? And this sort of reveals in which like the ways in which like our discussion around gender and gender fluidity is so much different from when this book was written. Like I think that in some ways Left Hand is kind of a victim and an artifact of the ways in which like our society has accelerated at this phenomenal pace when it comes to gender discussion. And so Left Hand is kind of remarkable for being written when it was, and yet also it feels like it falls short given like what we're discussing in our day-to-day like lives, through no fault of the book at all, because the fact that this came out in 69 is essentially, nothing short of incredible. It's like I can this won awards. Like this was not just some like fucking little book that came out and was discovered decades later. This book fucking mattered, and I can see why it did. And it remains that it should still matter. It's just that I think the ways in which it matters has changed around it versus like the book, having any sort of lack itself. Um, a few other points here quickly, but um, I did find the relationship between Gently and Estraven really compelling, and I really liked the way that this book ended. I like that it was different than what I predicted, and yet it still felt like it uh capitalized on like stuff that was coming before it. I don't know. I guess wrapping up here, like my big takeaways is that I think Le Guin is a really great author, and the more I think about and the more I discuss the book, I feel like the ways in which she writes the story and structures the story, her dialogue, uh her, like the themes, uh like there's so much there to analyze and discuss. It's like this book is sort of like an English major's dream. Like it's a fantastic, phenomenal book. And it like this still all leads up to like a but, and there's always like that kind of that X factor, that intangible sort of like what is it, and um I had mentioned at the first episode that this was a book that as a Dune fan, I had heard compared to Dune, and so I hope I'm not in my mind selling it short or unfairly comparing it. But I kind of felt like this book had a reputation in my mind that it did not quite meet, and I would not want to fault it for not reaching that stupid expectation in my head. But the thing is that like it didn't go off in that other way enough to feel like I don't know, to feel like it really ensnared me. There's so many fascinating ideas in this book, but there's a lot of times where I would close it and I kind of didn't think about it until I opened it back up, and
or we sat down for this podcast.
yeah. And again, like, yeah, it's like some of that's our reading schedule. I don't want to keep talking in circles. Um Even all that being said, I think this is a really, really good book, and I'm right there with Josh. It's just that there's something about it, and there's certain aspects of it that I feel like either didn't land, and yet there's so much that the book does right, and there's so many things, especially at the ending, that I think are like really fantastic, that give it so many points in my mind. I was thinking about my ranking. I shouldn't have to say this shit, but I was thinking about my ranking before Josh gave his, and I was going to give it a 7.5, and then I was thinking, like, you know what? I'm not even sure if I'm at a 7.5, but I'm pretty fucking close, and I'm gonna stand by that. I'm gonna give it a 7.4 for Left Hand of Darkness.
Out of 10?
Out of 10.
Out of 15. No, yeah, those are totally fair. I like and I agree with a lot of what you said there. Both I just wanted to bring up really quickly the whole like the masculine pronouns they use for the characters in this. That's something that is brought up in the afterword, actually. That is a critique that was levied I think during the time of its release back in the late 60s 70s, and and I didn't know this, I just learned this tonight reading it. Le Guin actually took that critique and actually wrote short stories like set on Gethin, to rectify that, where like there's a whole story where it's all feminine pronouns to kind of as a way to and like more about domestic life, child rearing and stuff on winter, which is interesting. And I think I don't think I've read those stories, so I might read the short stories at some point. But yeah, so
it sounds
totally,
interesting.
yeah, totally legitimate critiques, and I think you're right. It's like a forward-thinking book for its time, but also of its time in a way that we haven't contended with yet. Because 2001 tries to be forward thinking in a totally different way. It's not concerned about the gender norms or whatever. That's not even a thought. So, and then the other thing I want to mention too is this book. Yes, the first time I read this book, I read it probably in like a week or something, if that, because I was just devouring books at that point. And so that makes a huge difference. And then I feel like this is maybe the first non-popcorn flick book we have read. 2001, I know is deep and philosophical and very,
Oh my God.
but it's still,
for some reason, I think about the actual year 2001 when you said that. I'm
no,
on the book.
yeah, no, but that's still like a blockbuster movie kind of big. So this, I think the pace is, I think it's also just a very different kind of beast.
Yes.
Not to diminish your ratings at all. I'm agreeing with you guys. I think you're totally fair in your assessments. And you're right. It's not as it doesn't grab you in the same way like Lord of the Rings or 2001 or Hitchhikers, even Dune. Those are all like big blockbuster epics. This is not really meant to be that. So I think both your ratings are totally fair.
And so is yours.
Thanks. I mean, I do. I'm glad you guys liked it because I do. I think there's more to read from the Hainish cycle that you guys would enjoy too. So the Dispossessed being the next one I'm going to push on you guys. Maybe in a couple of years we can read that.
Well, we still have the book you gave us for last Christmas, The Color of
Magic.
Oh
yeah, I know. We'll do that.
I added that. I made sure that was put on my reading list before earlier in the podcast. If you heard me typing, that was like, I know there's some books that aren't on here yet.
Yeah. Nice.
So yeah, unless you guys have anything else to say, I just want to plug. Stay tuned for our behind the scenes episode coming up, where we'll be determining what we'll be reading next. Where we're going to be updating our reading lists, and based on the rankings of those books as we rank them in our personal reading lists, we will vote on the top 5 and see what ends up being our next book or series of books.
Yeah, very exciting.
Very. I really feel like it could be anything at this point.
I know.
It has never been more open-ended and uncertain than right now. So,
well, I mean, looking at it right now, you guys obviously need to update yours because both of your lists start with the Left Hand of Darkness, so it's still at the top of our overall ranking.
Oh, maybe we should read it again. I don't know. Take another 4 months or 5 months.
No. Let's do what Connor was saying. We'll do it in 1 week. We'll all reread the book in just 1 week, right? And then we'll talk about it and see do we think anything different now?
Yeah,
that's certainly an option.
That would be fun to do like a few years from now for some of these books. Be like, just see how that affects the.
Not like a chapter by chapter, but a revisit, a full book revisit.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, that would be like we'd have to know we have free time to actually get that amount of reading done in such a short period of time. But
maybe not a week. It would depend on the book and what we decide to do. But it could be like, all right, we're going to talk about this book on this date. Make sure you have it read by then.
Yeah. So Connor, guys, any final thoughts?
Let's you know what I wanted to mention on the book here was just that Estraven and Genly's relationship is like definitely like becomes the core of this book. And I was talking about it with my wife after, because she had read the book. I mentioned this during the first episode too. She had already read the book. And I was telling her what I thought about it when I was done. And I was like, yeah, it's crazy because it like ultimately becomes a love story between Genly and Estraven. And she's like, well, I didn't see it that way at all, because they didn't really have that like affection for each other. And I was like, yeah, I understand that. And I kind of explained, my my side of things, and it's like given that reveal um of like gently kind of suppressing or pushing away his perception of estrogen in the first place, it kind of becomes this story in a weird way of like this homophobic guy coming to realize that he actually thinks dudes are kind of hot and is like maybe wants to experiment a little bit, and not to reduce the story to something so basic and casual or whatever, but um it's like I guess what I wanted to end with is the most compelling thing that I enjoyed about this book is I feel like it is a love story, and I feel like the absence of Estroven in that final chapter really shows that too, because um, you see how lost Genly is. He's kind of just like drifting, through life at this point, and I guess I agreed with my wife insofar like it's not a traditional love story, even like an older love story like Pride and Prejudice or something. But like Connor, you had said it's a story that goes like not the way you think, or like it's a love story not in the way that you would consider it. And
Yeah.
and I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's like it's a love story of the soul. It's not a
Yeah.
love story of these two people who desire each other or think the other person is attract. It's like Estroven and Genly against all odds are like literal soulmates. And I think that's what Genly's grappling with in the wake of Estroven's death is not just the loss of someone that he cared for or even someone that he loved. It's like the loss of his self. Like
Yeah.
he was like unified. They themselves together were like unified, yin yang. And it's like, what is the yin without the yang, and vice versa? And that's like the open-endedness of the story too. I feel like is like what does half a soul live for when the other half is gone? And like that's what made this story feel like a love story to me. Not that they were gonna hold each other and kiss in the rain or whatever, but it was like a unification of these souls across the stars, and then like tragically they only have that for that brief moment. And I would be really really remiss if I didn't mention just how important I think that is to the story and how much I love that. So
Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing, and I think Le Guin does a great job of writing it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm glad you
Yeah.
mentioned that.
Yeah, thank you.
I totally agree. Well, thank you guys for reading this with me. I had fun. I know it took a little while, but
Thank you
I
thank you
enjoyed our
for getting us the
discussions.
book.
Yeah,
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 thank you.
of course. Um, folks, thank you for listening. If you are one of the many that listen to our journey here, we appreciate all of you. Yeah, look forward to the next episode where we figure our next move out. That's always a fun one.
And it won't be 2 3/4 hours long.
Well, probably not. If Josh and I just started a Doctor Who podcast called Who Dudes,
Oh, yeah.
where we run through Josh's live reactions to each new Doctor Who episode. It's been a lot of fun. So check that out if you are into Doctor Who, or even if you're not, if you just like us, that would be cool too. And then of course Connor and I have Green Dudes. So if you're a Green Day fan, don't forget about the Green Dudes.
Or just like us too. Like
Or if you just like us, yeah. But I mean that's a little bit less likely. I don't know if I'm not sure about that. But and also please give us a nice rating on Apple Podcasts, nice glowing review. That would be lovely, as well as on Spotify podcasts. I think Spotify just does ratings. I don't think they do reviews. So just rate us on Spotify, review us on Apple Podcasts. Get in touch with us. Follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, unfortunately, still at Chapter Chumps. On Blue Sky now, fortunately, at Chapter Chumps. Please give us a follow. Hit us up with your thoughts on Left Hand of Darkness. But most importantly, folks, until next time.
You can't stop the signal, Mal.
You can't stop the signal.
All right, and stream over.